So my son's been asking me to build him a Star Wars kind of space themed room for a while. And as a nerdy 80s kid who loved everything lightsabers and force powers, I was like, let's do this. And because everything hovers in Star Wars, I figure I'll start this off with a floating bed. I've got some other cool ideas, some LED lighting and then some shelving. And if you've been to the channel, you know that I'm going to attempt to do this on a budget. So let's find out if I can rise to the challenge or if this will be a complete failure and I'm doomed to the dark side of DIY. Let's do this. And like my last bed project, this one I will be building completely out of framing lumber and inexpensive plywood. The base of the bed will be a 2x8 rectangle with 2x4s as the actual bed frame. Two by sixes will make up the perimeter of the bed with mitered corners. And I do my best work outside on the concrete. This is a very beginner-friendly project. I'm using all common lumber that you can buy at your local big box store. And I'm using, simple joinery. These pocket holes work great for this kind of stuff since you won't be seeing any of it. And then I like to go around and give all my edges a nice round over to make them nice and smooth. I mitered some 2x10s to create a sort of shelf behind the bed. It also gives it this kind of futuristic look. I braced it with 2x4s and then I cut a hole for all the wiring. I ripped down a piece of 1/8 inch hardboard and this is going to be used to hide the 2x4s. I filled all the holes and imperfections with spackle and let it dry overnight. After the wood filler hardened, I went back the next day, sanded at 120 and then 220, and then caulked all my seams, followed by a coat of primer and then another light sand. I notched out an area for plugs and USBs. I made a modification to the original design of the bed and added this half round piece of plywood as a headboard. The plan here was to stain it and make it look like almost like a planet, but unfortunately that didn't work out, as you'll find out later in the video. We live in Florida and make it out to Disney World pretty often, and one of our favorite rides is the Rise of the Resistance. The attention to detail in that ride is just insane. Everywhere you look, you see these glowing diffused light panels. They're kind of like a signature look. And if I'm building my son a proper Star Wars bedroom, I feel like I need to include these. The only problem is, buying these would cost more credits than Han Solo owes Jabba the Hutt. I think I can build these cheaper. This next part of the build did require a little bit of graph paper and some pre-planning. I'll be using 5mm Yucca board because it's easy to cut and then easy to paint as well. The plan is to go kind of floor to ceiling. It's about an 8-foot ceiling. And I used graph paper to kind of space out how I want to do my pattern using a 3-inch hole saw. So I'm going to mark all my lines where my holes need to go, and then that way I can just come back with the jigsaw and finish it off. This was by far the most tedious part of the project. I did keep referencing my graph paper to make sure I was staying on track. Taking my time here and making sure my math was right really made a big difference in the final product. I ended up going in multiples of 7.5. The bigger ones are 12.5, and then a 2.5-inch gap between each circle. And that gave me a consistent look all the way down. I think the key when doing this is you have to have a drywall T-square. Otherwise, it's going to be really hard to do this. All right, let's start drilling some holes. The easiest way to do this, clamp these together, and then I only have to make one hole through both. And that way they'll be exactly the same on each side. So by far the hardest part of this whole process is removing these stupid little biscuits from the hole saw. There's got to be an easier way. I mean, there's a spring in there that's supposed to pop them out, but it doesn't work great. So I got to get in there with a screwdriver. There was a lot of collateral damage on this one. This was a little bit tedious, but I really do like the way the finished product turned out. I'm using 2x3s to build the frame for the panels. I decided to test my woodworking skills and do a half lap joint. I'm always looking for an excuse to use my table saw sled. I'll link my shop build video where I go into more detail about how I built my sled. I used a coat of primer and then gave it a light sand. I went with a high gloss black paint to give it more of like a metal look, and also to contrast the white lighting. The next challenging portion of this build was trying to figure out what kind of material to use to diffuse the light coming through the panel. My initial thought was to use like a frost-colored plexi. Plexi in this size though was very cost prohibitive. My next idea was to use a $10 shower curtain. Unfortunately, the shower curtain had wrinkles, and when I tried to use a heat gun to remove them, it melted the plastic. Next, I hit Michael's. My wife took pleasure in watching me suffer as I tried to order this stuff by the foot. Apparently, it's measured in yards. It's just like a white cloth material, but it's thick and rigid enough that it doesn't wrinkle up. I decided to test the diffuse nature of this stuff. The goal is to avoid any hot spots. Of course, as usual, I don't have enough clamps, so I had to use pocket hole clamps on this side. To attach these side rails, I'm not using any glue in case I ever have to take them apart at some point. I was able to build 2 of these panels for less than $50. So for this Death Star, I'm basically going to be copying another YouTuber's design. I think it's Lincoln Street Woodworks or something like that. Basically, I'm going to router out a circle, router some grooves for shelving. Keep it pretty simple. So these last few projects I've been getting a little more comfortable with the router. So I've never actually used a router this way before. This will be a first for me. I don't even know if this is the correct bit. Try it and find out. It's the worst that could happen. I cut a standard piece of plywood in half. That gives me a 4x4 square, and that way I can maximize the size of the circle. And I highly recommend ear protection. This thing screams like a banshee. Pine has a really neat grain pattern. It almost looks like the planet Jupiter. I just kind of free-handed a design that looked good, I guess, and I'm just going to cut it with the jigsaw. That's no moon. I hit all my edges with a roundover bit to give it a nice smooth finish. So I'm trying to figure out spacing on this thing. I want to maximize storage because my son has a lot of stuff. So I decided to go with 5 shelves with 10-inch spacing in between. I think that'll give me enough room for his Legos and stuff. And the next step, I'm going to be doing a 3/4 inch dado to sit my shelves in. I used to be intimidated by a router. Now I'm enjoying using it. So I don't love the way these shelves look on the corners here. So I think what I want to do is kind of round them over so it looks more spherical. I built a little jig to give all my shelves the same round over. I follow with a coat of primer and then a light sand. To mount this thing to the wall, I just took a 2x4 and cut it in half on a 45 to create a French cleat. I ran into some problems later on, as you'll see when I try to mount it to the studs. And this block on the bottom so it would sit flush on the wall. So when I removed my clamp, it left these little marks. But you know what? They actually kind of look like little TIE fighters. So you always got to look at the positive in things. I'm using painter's tape because I have a hard time with commitment. But this was 16 feet of lights. That just shows you how big this thing is. Here's a little preview. So it's time to address the other issues in this room. We've had these blinds in here since he was a baby. As you can see with the teeth marks and where he cut them with scissors. To continue with the futuristic space look, I'm going to be installing these blackout smart window curtains by Smart Wings. Very nice stuff. These things took me less than 10 minutes to install. And the best part is they run off this little solar panel. And it wouldn't be a futuristic space room without a new RGB ceiling fan. All right, time to get this room back together. Now on to the headboard, and the plan here was to just give it like a dark gray stain and let the wood grain kind of show through so it looked kind of like a planet, but unfortunately with this pine it just turned into a big splotchy mess. I ended up just going right over top of it and painting it. The problem I'm running into here is the stud spacing in this bedroom is 24 on center. And of course, where I'm placing the Death Star dead center in the middle of the stud, I'm only getting my French cleat into one stud. So what I'm gonna do is just take like a brace, and then this way I can hit 2 studs.
That's no moon. It's a space station.
I added another outlet to the side of the bed because, you know, kids and their devices. I attached the headboard to the frame using deck screws, and then I use hurricane ties to attach the bed frame to the base. Yeah. This was one of my favorite additions. I found it on Etsy. It's just a Star Wars light cover. 11 years ago, before our son was born, my wife and I installed this map on the wall, and I just don't have the heart to paint over it. I recently got hooked on the show Andor, and there's some really incredible set pieces on that show, and one of them gave me an idea. There's the ISB conference room. There's these kind of textured walls, and I found these panels on Amazon. The initial plan was to cover the entire wall with them, but then I came across this fabric Death Star backdrop, and I was like, oh man, I got to incorporate this. So I built a frame and then just stapled it to the frame and put some LED lights behind it. I used the wall panels to cover up the spaces on the sides, and then some hooks into the backdrop so it's easily removable. It wouldn't be a true Star Wars room unless it had a lightsaber hanger. I used the rest of the scrap 2x3s and painted it black. All right, let's reveal this thing.